Hey again, everybody. I'm back with another vlog post, and the topic of today's discussion, as you can probably tell from my t-shirt, is going to be professional wrestling. So, just, when I was very young, I didn't have any interest in it. First time I saw it, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. My cousin, he really liked it, and I thought it was kind of stupid the first time I saw it. It was kind of like, what is this crap we're watching? How do you like this? But then as I got a little bit older, more into my teen years, I started getting into it. It was on TV every Saturday in New York where I grew up. I forgot what they called it. It was like Superstars of Wrestling or whatever the program was. Where they had like a well-known, decent wrestler would fight what they call a jobber. These guys that little no-name local guys who get their asses kicked and kind of enhancement talent, I think is what they call it. And then like one of the super big stars would come out and do an interview or have some kind of skit or something. Uh, you know, so as I got a little bit older, heading into my teen years, I started to get into it. Became a big Hulkamaniac. That was the era. Hulk Hogan rockin' wrestling, late '80s, early '90s. That was like the big boom of the wrestling business. Whereas in the past, it had been in these dingy little, dimly lit arenas all over the country. And then it was kind of condensed from those little regional things into one big umbrella, and led to what we had, during that era. And I'm assuming today. I haven't watched wrestling in over 20 years. I think a lot of the guys I liked, they're either retired or unfortunately passed away. So, I don't have any interest with it anymore. So, but growing up as a kid, my cousin was pretty much the one who got me into it. Like I said, he had always liked it. And then Hulk Hogan comes along, and nothing to do with the Rocky movie. I don't think I saw him in the Rocky movie until many years later. But like I said, just started watching it on TV. If I'm not mistaken, one of our good friends that I recently got back in touch with on Facebook about a year or so ago, I think she took me to the Nassau Coliseum to watch the simulcast or whatever the heck they called it, the very first WrestleMania, which was in Madison Square Garden, 20 something miles down the road. But they had it up on the scoreboard at the Coliseum or something. I remember it was raining like hell that day, and it kept kind of going in and out, and everybody was screaming they wanted their money back. But correct me if I'm wrong. You know who I'm talking about. I think you did take me and somebody else to go see it. So anyway, but then over the years, my cousin and I, we'd go to the Nassau Coliseum there on Long Island in Uniondale, home of the Islanders, and we'd watch wrestling matches and stuff. And it was always a little bit different from what you see on the TV. They're a little more loose. There were certain things they could do because it wasn't going to be broadcast. So we used to enjoy that. I remember one time, I'm pretty sure I was there with my cousin, where they were having a battle royale. Now, what that's called is there's like 30 guys in the ring at once, and they try to throw everybody else over the top, and the last one standing is the winner. And I just remember, I'm almost positive my cousin was the one that was there with me. I don't know who took us, if it was my uncle, my dad, my stepdad, whoever, or his sister's husband, whoever it was that took us. And Roddy Piper was one of the famous heel bad guys, for a generation. And instead of getting thrown over the top, he got pulled underneath, and he was fighting with somebody, and they fought all the way back to the dressing room. And my cousin's like, he's gonna come back with an Islander jersey and like a stick or something, and he's gonna end up winning it. And I'm like, whatever. And sure enough, like 5 minutes later, here he comes running out with the Islander jersey, the stick, beats the crap out of everybody, throws everybody over the top, and he's the winner. So I remember, and I remember my cousin couldn't go, and I told him I wasn't going to go, out of solidarity, but I ended up going with my stepdad. Hulk Hogan was was fighting Earthquake, this big like 500-pound dude, in a stretcher match. So I remember going to that, even though I told my cousin I wasn't going to go because he couldn't make it. Whatever, but so many legends at that time. It was just a different thing. It was like a male soap opera, but when you're a kid, you don't see it for what it really is. And at that time, they were still under what wrestling business called kayfabe, is what it used to be called, where they still had to stay in character and pretend like everything was real. As it got more to the late '90s and the early 2000s, which is like the last time I used to watch it, they kind of got away from that. They kind of acknowledged that, yeah, it's a, you know, it's entertainment. It's not really all this stuff that goes on, you know. But you know, at that time, late '80s, I mean, so many legends. You had Hulk Hogan, you had Macho Man Randy Savage, you had the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. Some of my favorite guys were, you know, Junkyard Dog. I used to like Tito Santana. God, who else did I used to like back in the day? British Bulldogs, you know, Demolition, all these like Andre the Giant, all these legendary guys, like larger than life, not only physically but just their personalities, you know, their characters. It was just, it was cool when you're a kid. You know, I had baseball and hockey. I've talked about that before in my other videos, but wrestling was like, it's sports entertainment, but it's kind of like on a different plane, you know. But you know, of course, Hogan was like the biggest thing for me. Like there was another big guy at the time, the Ultimate Warrior. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago. I was never big on him. You know, I was always obviously from the shirt that somebody got me a couple of years ago. Probably Rebecca got it for me, I guess. Always a Hulkamaniac. You know, train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. You know, all the Hogan stuff that we all used to do when we were kids or when we were at the arena. You know, just a lot of fond memories of watching it. My dad mentioned to me once that like before I was born, like him and his brother, you know, my uncle, my cousin's dad, you know, and my grandfather, they would go into Madison Square Garden and they would watch wrestling matches, which blew my mind because like none of them ever really said anything about it. Although my uncle, my cousin's dad, him and I would talk about it a little bit, you know. He was a fan of Ted DiBiase, who was like at that time, you know, one of the big bad guys. But because he was Italian, I guess with that name, you know, he was a big fan of his. You know, I don't know if he was actually Italian, but he had, you know, the Italian name. So, you know, I just think back like as I got into my mid teenage years, I really got into it. You know, at that time, there was the two big promotions. And then a couple little smaller ones sprinkled all around here. There was the WWF, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, and all those guys, and then you had WCW, which was down south. You know, Ric Flair, Sting, Lex Luger, Harley Race, all these other Dusty Rhodes, the other legends, but not as well known because again, it's like I've talked about in so many other videos, regional stuff. You know, down south, you're a WCW fan. Up northeast, you're a WWF fan. You know, because WWF was headquartered up in Danbury, Connecticut, somewhere up in Connecticut, up there, whatever, you know. So obviously, I grew up in the north, you know, so I was big on WWF. Later, I got into to WCW a little bit. I didn't like it as much, you know, but I still watched it. You know, my cousin and I would watch it on, you know, TBS or something once a month. Would have their special. NBC once a month would have the WWF special on a Saturday night. You know, I was too young to have a social life and go out, so you know, I'd watch that. And then as I got older, I still didn't have much of a social life, so Monday night we would watch that. You know, I just positive memories of that stuff too. You know, I enjoyed watching it. I mean, it was so stupid and cheesy at times, you know, but just so many classic memories. Like even to this day, you know, I'm going to be 45 years old in January. My cousin and I still talk about this stuff that happened 30 something years ago. You know, 20 years ago. We'll text each other during the week just to see, you know, how we're doing or something, and just kind of throw a reminder into that. You know, I mean, it's just everlasting, like those positive memories surrounding the wrestling business and whatnot. I never thought it was real, you know. I always kind of known it was BS, you know. But it was just fun. There's just, you know, so many positive memories about the whole experience growing up. Didn't have the easiest time growing up. A lot of stuff going on at home. You know, I was kind of bullied a little bit, picked on for a lot of different reasons. I'll get back into that when I get to one of my, you know, life experience videos, staying out of that. But I think that's part of the reason I got into wrestling, was like it was an escape from kind of like other things I got into, you know, sports, comic books, movies, TV shows. Everything for me was an escape from the life I was dealing with, or choosing not to deal with, however you want to word it, you know. But like I said, we would go to the Coliseum and we'd watch the wrestling matches, and it was kind of cool. And probably very early teens, since, like I said, the WWF headquarters was up in somewhere in Connecticut. It was only like I don't know, maybe an hour or two drive from where we were living in New York, and they had a mall up there, big mall. And this one time, they had for those of you who are familiar with wrestling, there was a tag team that was going to be signing autographs there. Shawn Michaels, Marty Jannetty, the Rockers. Shawn Michaels, of course, went on to be like a super duper famous guy, became Heartbreak Kid and whatnot. So I remember it was me, my mom, my stepdad, and my grandmother. And my grandmother didn't really want to go. Yeah, I don't know if she wasn't feeling well, was tired, whatever. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to have nothing to do with it. She's like, just take the kid, go. But I guess somehow or another she got dragged along, and we're standing there in the mall, and we're waiting for a couple hours for these guys to show up, and there's mostly little kids. I mean, there's parents with them and stuff, obviously, but mostly little kids in line and whatnot. And my grandmother was standing there, just you could see on her face she was just so miserable. And here comes Shawn Michaels, and I swear to God, she went like. She lost 20 years and like that. She's knocking kids over to like go over to Shawn Michaels because I guess she was finding him so attractive. I mean, literally, she's like pushing people out the way and stuff. I just thought that was the funniest thing. Yet another great grandparent memory that I have there. As I got older, up into when I started getting up into high school, the business changed a lot. Hulk Hogan had been on his run for 10 something years. He was getting a little older, getting a little beat up. I guess the steroids were kicking in and kicking his body for taking him to the woodshed, so to speak. So he and people were kind of getting tired of the gimmick. I'll be honest. Like there were a lot of younger guys that he was kind of holding back. So people were kind of getting tired of his gimmick. So he left the company. And he, started making, such Academy Award-winning films like Suburban Commando. I Was Frozen Today. My cousin knows what I'm talking about. No Holds Barred, Nanny movies, whatever the heck he was doing. And then he did that TV show, the Thunder in Paradise, which I never watched. So for a couple of years, for me personally, it kind of died down. Once he was gone. It wasn't as exciting. I didn't really like the newer crop of guys that were coming around. I liked the guys I grew up with, like I said, Macho Man, Roddy Piper, all the guys from like the late 80s or whatnot, So, and then other things were going on in life, at that time, high school, girlfriend, new friends, getting out, driving, exploring, whatever, But the two brothers that I was good friends with, that I always talk about up in New York, they started getting into it. And so we would, we'd be watching TV if we weren't doing anything on a Monday night. That was, what I'm trying to think. Like the WCW, the one down south would come on for like 3 hours, and then WWF up north would come on for 2 hours, or vice versa. And you'd be sitting there flipping channels during the commercials or whatnot. Went through this whole new phase that they called the Monday Night Wars because they were obviously competing with each other, trying to put each other out of business. So Hogan ends up going down to WCW, and he got his old gimmick again. And at first, people kind of liked it, but I think people were just kind of tired of it, honestly. So they made like the most genius marketing decision of all time. Turn him into like the ultimate bad guy, and it blew up. I mean, it was like it's sort of before the internet. You can't imagine there was no Twitter and all that crap back then, but I mean, it was like holy crap! You just took like a hero to millions of kids all over the world, and you made him like the ultimate bad guy and the ultimate badass. And I mean, it made it so exciting. And they came up with this thing called the NWO, the New World Order. I was trying to find that T-shirt, I couldn't, but I found my HULKAMANIA, so close enough. So that whole thing, like, reinvigorated the wrestling business the way Hogan did in the 80s with his rock and roll gimmick and kind of taking it out of those. I'm sorry, hold on, I got something on the screen. As far as, Hogan invigorating it in the 80s, well, he just reinvigorated it here in the very late 90s, And what WCW was doing was it was plucking all those older veteran guys from WWF up north where, WWF was moving in a different direction with these young guys that were coming up that had been held back for so long by those legend guys, and they brought all these legend guys down to down south to WCW. So it's like when I started getting back into it, obviously Hogan was a big factor, but I go to WCW, and it's just funny to me because like growing up, the guys I couldn't stand, Ric Flair, Ted DiBiase, like looking back on it now as an adult, I'm like, man, those guys were freaking awesome. Mr. Perfect, you hated them as a kid because they were what the bad guys in wrestling called heels. Okay, so they were the heel characters. You hated them as a kid. You booed the crap out of them. But Rick Rude's another one. It just comes to mind. But looking back now as an adult and looking back at the big overall picture, it's like I developed such an appreciation for these guys as I got older. Just they're actors, they're athletes slash actors, but I mean like the characters they played, the roles they played. It's like Ric Flair ended up becoming one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. I know I got a lot of Army buddies that were big Ric Flair fans. And it's just my cousin. It's just funny how your perspective changes when you get older, and you see things that you didn't see when you were young. This is every aspect of life, but of course, this particular post I'm talking about wrestling. We'll get back to that when I talk about other aspects, because that's just that's something that happens a lot in my life. I realize these things much later on. Sometimes it's too late to do something about it. Sometimes it's not, but it's just funny how your perspective changes as you grow up. So I just came to appreciate guys like Ric Flair, Ted DiBiase. Still liked Hogan, Roddy Piper, all these guys. It's just a shame that a lot of these guys went before their time. It's a rough business. You're traveling probably 11 months out of the year. Your body's beat to hell. So they were unfortunately taking steroids, taking drugs, just living a hard life. So unfortunately a lot of them go before their time. So it's sad because these guys were kind of like your childhood heroes. You hate to see them. One of the big things too that made wrestling so entertaining for me is when you're watching, not when you're in the arena, because it's you just hearing the sounds of the match, but watching it on TV or pay-per-view was another big thing that kind of came about from the wrestling business. You had your commentators, and you always had your good guy commentator that was straight edge, and then you had your bad guy commentator that was all about the heels. And I was fortunate in the generation I came up to have some of the best commentators. In my personal opinion, Bobby Heenan, the ultimate heel, who was like a bad guy his whole career and a manager, but another guy that years later I come to appreciate, even though I couldn't stand him as a kid. They teamed him up with Gorilla Monsoon, who was sort of a bad guy in his day when he was a wrestler, but by the time he became an announcer, was just like the ultimate good guy. So I mean, just the banter that these guys had back and forth was incredible. I mean, you talk about two guys that could feed off each other and make it so damn entertaining. Even if the match was boring as whale shit, these guys were just so entertaining. I mean, they were as much a part of that entertainment as the guys in the ring. You gotta love it. And there were some other great commentators. Jim Ross was another commentator that came from WCW up to WWF. Just all these expressions, these southern expressions he would bring and all this crazy stuff, And then, like I said, I'll wrap it up soon because we're coming up on the 20-minute mark here, and I've been trying to keep these a lot shorter than my original test run of an hour there. Years later, very late 90s, early 2000s, before I moved to Houston, before I went in the Army, when I was still kind of into it, there were all these new guys that, at first I didn't care about, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Chris Jericho, just countless guys. I could ramble off a list here, but, that was kind of like the new generation was, sort of like I was talking about before, how WCW had taken all the veterans from the 80s and did their thing. WWF was doing their new thing, and it was really entertaining. And so I got back into WWF and paid less attention to WCW because a lot of those guys, Hogan included, were kind of written out, and they left, and Then they went through this whole what they called hardcore phase. There was a third promotion. I didn't really like it. It was called ECW Extreme Championship Wrestling. All about like just crazy crap, like chairs and blood and weapons and all. Like I didn't really like that. I liked the way that WWF and WCW did it, where like anything could happen anywhere. You could have a fight. What did they have one in like a McDonald's kids? Like the crap they have at McDonald's where the kids can go play. They had one there. Just stuff like that. So. Again, I don't want to make this video too long. There's not a real whole lot I can talk about in the realm of professional wrestling, because it was just something I liked roughly from the age of 7 to like my very late teens there. Again, I haven't watched it in about 20 years, mostly because the guys I like, the guys I grew up with, either long since retired, passed away, whatever, and not crazy about the newer product. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on that. I'm trying to come up with interesting things to talk about. Once I get into it, the bulk of my posts or vlogs, whatever you want to call them, are going to be about life experience. So I'm just trying to kind of do a little variety here in the beginning, so that there's something different to watch if you're so inclined to do so. Because once I get to that other stuff, it's going to be a little more serious. A lot of this is tongue in cheek. We're having a good time. I'm laughing about it. I'm remembering things that positive memories. When I get to the life experiences, that's not always going to be so positive. So, anyway, want to thank you guys again for sitting through these videos. I hope you really are enjoying them. I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have, good, bad, indifferent. Just please let me know. This way I can kind of improve it and make it more enjoyable for everybody, because I know some of the topics that I'm going to talk about are not things that everybody's going to be interested in. So I definitely appreciate you guys sticking it out, and I will see you in the next video.